Nervous about an upcoming job interview? Here are 3 tips to help you get to those 4 magical words. When can you begin? Hi, and welcome to the Law Simplified. I'm Shaveen Bandaranaike. Over the past 8 years of conducting one-on-one, fast-track and masterclass programs for students all around the world, I've had the privilege of seeing them progress in their academics and then succeed in their careers. Oftentimes, one of the major gripes, so to speak, that I hear from these students is how nerve-wracking and stressful interviews have been. Whether it is in relation to joining a firm, going into the corporate field or the corporate sector in general, the process of interviewing can often be quite daunting. Irrespective of how knowledgeable you are and how articulate you may be in terms of your understanding of the law itself and of the job that you're getting yourself into, oftentimes candidates fall short because they are not able to market or present themselves well during an interview. First impressions last, and unfortunately for most, because you are unable to present yourself or market yourself properly, a great opportunity slips through your fingers. This video is meant to give you 3 simple tips that you can incorporate into your interview technique, so to speak, and your preparation, so that the next time that you are presented with an opportunity and whilst you're being interviewed, you can put these into practice and hopefully, as I mentioned in the beginning, hear those 4 magical words. When can you begin? Tip number 1. Answer the reason why they're asking you a question and not the question itself. What do I mean by this? Oftentimes, interviewers ask you questions not precedently to find out whether you know a particular answer, but rather to determine whether you're a right fit for that particular job. When any interviewer, for that matter, asks you a question, think to yourself why this question is being asked. Here are a few example questions and what they actually mean, or rather, what they're trying to gather from your response. One of the most common questions that are often asked during an interview, irrespective of the profession that you're applying for, is where would you see yourself in 5 years? Most candidates tend to answer this in a very superficial manner, but it's important to understand why an organization would want to know about this. Some might say it's to gauge or to determine whether you are going to leave the company at a certain stage. But more often than not, try to answer this question keeping in mind that it's an indicator whether the candidate is in fact goal-oriented. They want to determine if you know exactly what you want in the time span of 5 years, whether you've made plans for yourself, whether you know where your career trajectory is going to take you, and how best you're going to fit into the role that has been advertised and that you're being interviewed for. So when you answer this question, when you answer an interviewer or an employer as to what your plans are within the next 5 years, it's not really about whether you're going to leave this company or not. Rather, it's to gauge whether you have a planned existence, so to speak, whether you know exactly where you want to be at a certain stage in your career. Another common question that is often asked of candidates by interviewers as well as employers is, do you know what your biggest weakness is? Now, some may argue that to answer this question is to try and spin what would otherwise be considered as a positive or a strength as a weakness. The running joke, and you might have seen this in TV shows or movies, is to say that your biggest weakness is that you're a perfectionist. Oftentimes, these types of cliched responses don't really give the interviewer or the employer an insight as to who you are, apart from the fact that you're trying to please them in some way, shape, or form. What you must know is that by asking this question, an employer wants to find out whether you are able to reflect on your flaws and moreover, whether you have adapted to it in some way subsequently. So for example, you have to be honest not just with yourself, but with the employer as well as the interviewer to say that I know what my weakness is, I know what my problems are, and over the past several years, my experience has shown that this is how I need to improve on it. And then show exactly what you've done afterwards to make sure that you are less in terms of that particular weakness or you have eliminated it completely. Tip number 2. Don't be afraid to tell them what you know, what you don't know, and what you want to know. Most often, candidates find it as a prerequisite and a must to answer every single question, whether they know an answer to it or not. In reality, what you must do in terms of showing self-confidence and the fact that you're not insecure about yourself is to be upfront with that which you don't know and which you want to learn as well. What this indicates to an interviewer and a potential employer is that you're willing to grow, you know what your weak points are, but more often than not, you want to better yourself moving forward. When you try to exude confidence and show your interviewer or show the employer that there are certain things that you're familiar with, certain things that you aren't familiar with, but show an eagerness to learn and to explore the opportunity, that in itself speaks volumes. So don't be afraid if an interviewer or if an employer is going to ask you something that you're unfamiliar with. It's as important to show them that you're willing to learn as it is to show that you do know certain things, but there's room to grow. Tip number 3, ask as much as you are asked. Now, generally, at the end of an interview or the recruitment process, your interviewer or the employer will generally throw the ball to your end and ask you whether you have anything you want to clarify from the panel or the interviewer, him or herself. Use this opportunity. Don't just use it to ask things that you want to clarify on. The simple, more generic, superficial things such as the remuneration or the job requirements or the working culture. But use that opportunity to control the narrative. Make sure you ask questions that indicate to the interviewer, to the employer, of your own personality traits. Here are a few example questions that you can ask and what that may indicate to the interviewer, to the employer. Using the opportunity to ask questions in order to showcase who you are is a great attribute that you can inculcate in your preparation for the next interview. So for example, when you're presented with an opportunity to ask questions, ask something like where you belong in the hierarchy of the organization. This indicates to the interviewer or the employer that you are ambitious and you're goal-oriented. You want to see yourself in a particular position and you want to see yourself go up and above in the career ladder. By asking this question, not only will you be able to get an understanding of the structure of the organization, but also indicate to the interviewer and the employer that you plan on staying within this organization and rising up the ranks. Another question that you could ask that indicates to the interviewer, the employer, that you have more than just the superficial or the direct line of questioning that any other candidate would ask is to ask proactively whether you can supplement your current skill set with anything else that's desirable for that particular role. This indicates engagement and a willingness to grow. It shows an employer that on the one hand, you want this particular job, you want this particular position, and on the other hand, that you're planning ahead. You want to do what's best for the organization. Right. These are 3 very simple and relatively straightforward things that you can start ingratiating and incorporating into your preparation when it comes to a new job interview. More often than not, it's quite frustrating when you know that you are a perfect fit for a particular vocation, a particular position, but unfortunately you can't get your foot through the door because you haven't really addressed or presented what you are truly capable of during an interview process. It's almost akin to studying for an entire semester and sitting for an examination on an off day. Hopefully, with these tips in place, you won't just be able to get a job, but also progress in that career trajectory later on as well. But having said that, until the next time that we meet, have fun, stay safe, and as always, obey the law.